Low carb people love to point out that the Inuits followed a low carb diet and seemed to be largely okay, which were a very large, widespread indigenous tribe way up near the Arctic region across a couple of continents. There's some problem with this, and I'm going to chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this today. Again, this is one of these cases where when they point this out, what they fail to realize is a historical context. And not only were these not a particularly healthy people compared to other indigenous demographics, they have specific genetic mutations that have been found to make them resistant to even going into ketosis, which is fascinating. In other words, this is a tribe of people who, because they essentially followed an almost ketogenic diet due to not having other options, their body literally developed a resistance against ketosis. Okay? In other words, it seemed to be an important survival mechanism for those tribes to even survive by kind of avoiding the state. So let's go into that a little bit of the problems with this. One thing that people are not factoring in, humans have followed a wide variety of diets. That is why we have been so successful as a species, in the sense of very, very few species develop large populations across multiple continents, multiple climate types. Okay, humans are somewhat unique in that regard, in that we have adapted dietarily to allow us to pretty much inhabit every major continent, short of Antarctica, to inhabit climates that are sub-freezing year-round, all the way to climates right at the equator. From a species perspective, that is actually considered exceptional. Okay, the ability to thrive in that many different environments is massive. And a big part of that is, as we know, is the ability to cook. Okay, cooking food is one of the major things that has allowed us to do this, right? It allowed us to assimilate and eat foods that we wouldn't normally be able to eat. Like, you hear people talk about anti-nutrients and all this stuff, which largely are resolved by just cooking your food. Okay, so if you have foods that are high in certain anti-nutrients you're worried about, this is why the experts or the quack doctors who talk about this get debunked. They're like, but we're not eating raw oats, we cook them. Okay, we cook our foods. Okay, so this becomes a completely moot point. And historically around the globe, that's been a successful and viable strategy for us. The ability to cook food, kind of a big deal. And again, that's allowed us to expand into these regions. But you go up into the Arctic region like that, and that is a very extreme environment. Why? Because it's so cold that very few plants grow. Okay? In other words, probably the lowest plant intake of any population on Earth, but that is not year-round. Keeping in mind, they still get plants in certain seasons. They still have certain amounts stored away, but they're getting a little bit. It's not like it's a zero plant, zero fiber diet. All right. But here's some take-home points for some of that people miss. Number one, they were not a particularly long-lived group. Ooh, that's a big one. This demographic doesn't live to be like 80 years old in their natural environment. Okay? So when we start talking about some of the food choices of the really high saturated fat diet they follow, they don't live long enough for the atherosclerosis to really kill them off. In other words, their life expectancy was in the 50s. Okay? And if they make it to 50, they've made a pretty good run of it. Well, that's usually the sort of age we start getting really concerned with, cardiovascular disease kicking in. Yeah, you guys see the issue here? They don't live long enough for the major concerns of the very high saturated fat intake from all the blubber and everything they're eating. Again, all the seals, the whales, all that stuff. Okay? They don't live long enough for it to be an issue. Well, that's a problem using them from a health perspective. All right. Number two, they were noted by explorers for being rotund. If you guys go back and look at the notes of the explorers who first found this before these groups got introduced to modern diets, they were heavy set. Meaning, if you look at the description and the language involved, the rotund, they were fatter than people were used to. Now people say, oh, how could that be on low carb? Because they eat a very high fat diet. Okay? We need to be clear on that. They ate a very high-fat diet. You're going to gain body fat easier. It's not a difficult concept to grasp when people say, but some people do get ripped on really low-carb, higher-fat diets. They do. But do the majority of people? How many people do you see who do these keto lifestyles? You look at the groups who are still obese after years. Okay, I used to mess with ketogenic diets. I'm leaner now on high carbs, way leaner. Just pointing that out. Okay, that isn't the norm. That isn't the norm on that type of diet. Just like it's not the norm for people following the standard American diet to be really ripped and lean. Okay, well, these people were not lean. They were still kind of fat. They were kind of fat. They're way fatter than any other indigenous tribe that was encountered. And they don't have a long lifespan. So using them as a model for, hey, we should do this type of diet because they were forced to do it and they managed to survive. They managed to create a tribe that grew to not to massive populations, but, sizable, and survived into their 50s. Okay? Again, if we use that logic, hey, if your group is able to reproduce and make it into their 50s on the average life expectancy, then the standard American diet's amazing. Right? Being overweight and dying in your 50s, but still managing to have children. If that's our mark of a successful, healthy diet, then just stick to McDonald's. We do that all the time here. What's so exceptional about that? All right, furthermore, we come back over to the other point. They want to use it to push the ketogenic diets. They developed a gene that they were resistant to the ketogenic diet. And they still had higher carb intakes than the average person on a keto diet because a lot of them ate a lot of raw meat that still had glycogen. When we cook meat, right, and it's not fresh right off the animal, we take the carbohydrate out of it. But raw, fresh meat still has glycogen in it. So just an FYI. So again, when you start looking at this realistically, this whole thing breaks apart and people say, oh, look how they did it and they were healthy. Because they survived into their 50s and managed to have children. We could just eat McDonald's all day and achieve that. This is not exceptional. Okay, just pointing that out. Not the mark of success. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys and gals next time.